You're listening to Nocturnal Nightmares. While the world sleeps peacefully, we open the door to what lies beneath. The stories that surface in silence, the fears that rise in the dark. These are not dreams, they are reminders. Stay with us. And don't close your eyes just yet. A ghost of power, 3%, shimmered on my camera's display. The time etched itself, 4:37 a.m. These digits marked the fading edge of normalcy, the final mundane seconds before the world tilted. I, Elias Thorne, stood sentinel at the gateway to Blackwood Ridge Forest Preserve, tripod a familiar weight across my shoulder. Spare batteries nestled like promises in my jacket lining. January's teeth, sharp and unforgiving, worried my exposed skin. This ritual was etched into my bones. Rouse at 3:45, a 40-minute pilgrimage by road, then the 2-mile ascent on foot to Peregrine Bluff. Gear deployed before the sun bled color into the sky. Selling annuities paid the bills. Capturing dawn's fleeting alchemy fed the soul. Or so I believed, until that specific unfolding of darkness. Gravel scuttled beneath my boots as I surrendered to the path. My headlamp pierced the gloom, a solitary beam snagging on reflective trail markers like fleeting thoughts. Pine and damp decay, the forest's familiar incense, filled my lungs. A delicate lacework of frost silvered the ground, yielding with a faint, crystalline crunch underfoot. The first mile dissolved uneventfully behind me. Breath plumed visibly in the frigid air, thighs burned with the steady, insistent climb. My watch face glowed. 4:52 a.m. good time. Dawn wouldn't break until 6:43. Granting ample margin to reach the overlook, to court the perfect composition. The divergence arrived at the trail's fork, where paths cleaved toward Peregrine Bluff and Hemlock Hollow. It was there, filtering through the skeletal trees to my right, toward the hollow, that I glimpsed it, an anomalous luminescence. My first thought, another photographer, an earlier riser. But this light, it moved differently. Not the staccato burst of a flash, nor the steady gaze of a headlamp. It pulsed, a core of incandescent blue-white, akin to summer lightning, trapped beneath the forest ceiling. It shimmied between the ancient trunks, casting aberrant shadows that writhed across the frozen earth like things struggling to be born. Instinct screamed, "Camera!" Whatever this phenomenon, it promised an image unlike any other. I killed my headlamp, silencing its intrusion, and raised the camera. Through the lens, the lights sharpened, their motion a bizarre choreography defying explanation, splitting, coalescing, spiraling around bark, ricocheting off unseen surfaces. The woods became a silent discotheque illuminated by this cold fire. My hands trembled as I fumbled with settings. ISO 3200 f2.8, a shutter speed desperate to freeze motion at 160th. I fired off exposures, but the LCD offered only mocking darkness, punctuated by faint, spectral blurs. The lights evaded capture, existing somehow outside the camera's grasp of reality. Logic whispered possibilities. Ball lightning, St. Elmo's fire, some rare atmospheric theater. Yet, ball lightning doesn't weave patterns. It doesn't possess intent. These luminous motes moved as if sentient, enacting a silent pre-dawn ritual among the sleeping trees. Closer. I had to get closer. Prudence urged me to remain on the path. Observe from safety. But 2 decades chasing light had taught Elias Thorne that the sublime rarely resides within the bounds of caution. Securing the tripod to my pack, I began to navigate the undergrowth, angling toward the spectacle. The terrain plunged sharply here. My boots skidded on frost-kissed leaves. I stumbled, catching myself on rough, frigid bark. Ahead, perhaps 100 yards distant, the lights continued their ballet, maintaining their separation regardless of my pace. My breathing grew ragged, the exertion stealing warmth despite the cold, sweat dampening my inner layers. Another glance at my watch. 5:14 a.m. The eastern horizon remained stubbornly black. Between the trees, the darkness felt absolute, save for that hypnotic, luminous display. 15 minutes of careful scrambling later, the lights ceased their movement. They hovered, suspended in a small clearing just ahead, pulsing with that same uncanny, blue-white radiance. I sank behind a fallen log, a natural blind, and raised the camera once more. The battery icon blinked a desperate 2%. I had to try. The clearing swam into focus. The lights hung clustered about 6 feet from the ground, a swarm of softballs composed of cold light. No discernible heat emanated from them, despite their intensity. Indeed, the air seemed to acquire a deeper chill in their proximity. I depressed the shutter. The click echoed, obscenely loud in the profound quiet. The lights reacted instantly, exploding outward like a flock of startled phosphorescent birds. But instead of dispersing, they wheeled inward, accelerating into a frantic spiral that coalesced into a single, blinding column stretching from the forest floor to the highest reaches of the canopy. The fine hairs on my arms lifted. Static electricity sang in the air, a palpable tension. My camera's screen abruptly died. Simultaneously, the spare battery in my pocket became a searing coal against my leg. I dropped both camera and battery, just as a high-frequency whine pierced the air, escalating until my teeth vibrated with sympathetic agony. What followed fractured time, my mind struggling to assemble the fragments. The column of light detonated, a silent omnidirectional flash that bleached my vision white. When sight returned mere seconds later, the clearing was plunged back into darkness, yet it wasn't empty. Movement stirred the frosted leaves. Footprints, appearing spontaneously, one after another, impressed into the rime, as if by invisible wanderers. Their pattern defied logic, overlapping, crisscrossing, pointing in contradictory directions. Some sank deep, suggesting immense weight. Others barely skimmed the surface. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs as I watched these phantom tracks materialize, accelerating into a chaotic, frenzied dance. Then, as abruptly as they had begun, they ceased. The final set led to the clearing's heart and simply ended, vanished. Frozen behind the log, I existed outside of time. Minutes stretched into perceived hours. My hand shook violently, the flashlight beam quivering. When courage finally returned, I forced myself into the clearing. The beam confirmed the impressions, tangible, undeniable. Methodically, like documenting an impossible scene, I examined them. Sizes varied wildly. Some approximated a human foot, perhaps a size 10 or 11. Others were diminutive, childlike, and some bore no resemblance to anything terrestrial. Elongated shapes, strange phalangeal ridges where toes should be. suggesting a gate utterly alien. My light snagged on metal glinting near the clearing's center. My camera lay prone in the leaves, battery compartment agape and empty. The spare, the one that had burned hot in my pocket, was gone without a trace. The camera body itself felt unnaturally cold, like it had been pulled from deep cryo storage. Hints of grey bruised the eastern sky as I finally gathered my violated equipment. My watch was stopped, frozen at 5:14 a.m., its digital face inert despite a battery less than a year old. My phone displayed 6:22 a.m., but the screen flickered erratically, the compass app spinning in useless, frantic circles. One last look at the clearing. The footprints remained, stark against the frost, but already softening, ephemeral evidence dissolving with the approaching dawn. By the time the sun crested the ridge, they would be mere memories imprinted on damp earth. No photos, no proof. Only the fragile architecture of recollection. The return hike was a blur of forced speed along the marked trail. Every rustle became a potential pursuit. Every shadow held nascent movement. The familiar forest felt subtly altered, skewed, like a room visited in a dream. I reached the empty parking lot precisely as the sun shattered over the eastern peaks. My car sat alone as I'd left it, yet not entirely. Upon the frosted windshield, a pattern. Not the random fractals of ice, but deliberate concentric circles interlaced with sharp, angular glyphs I'd never encountered. By the time I located the scraper in the trunk, the strengthening sun had begun its work. The patterns liquefied and vanished before I could even think to capture them, leaving only fading mental impressions, like the residue of a fever dream. Blackwood Ridge remains unvisited by me since that morning. My camera, despite new batteries, new cards, is a dead thing. The phantom images I thought I'd captured exist on no device, in no cloud. My watch eventually resumed ticking, but its grasp on time remains unreliable. Sometimes, gazing from my window on cold, clear mornings towards the distant woods, I imagine faint, pulsing glimmers of blue-white light weaving through the trees. I no longer feel the urge to investigate. Some veils are best left undisturbed. My office overlooks the preserve. During slow afternoons, selling security against life's uncertainties, my eyes drift to that expanse of trees, pondering. Rationalizations, exotic electrical discharges, marsh gas illusions, shared delusion, crumble under the weight of the tangible. The footprints were real. The frost glyphs were real. Last week, a new client sought coverage for his photography enterprise. He spoke of recent sunrise excursions to Blackwood Ridge, mentioning something odd. Lights, he'd murmured, flickering in the trees, like nothing I ever saw. He inquired, voice hesitant, if our policies covered gear damage from unexplained electrical events. I sold him the most robust plan available, and I gently suggested he might find sunsets more rewarding. Certain places, in those liminal hours before dawn, are not quite aligned with the world we assume we know. There, strange lights perform their silent ballets, leaving only questions and melting footprints behind. The tripod from that morning still resides in my closet. Occasionally, retrieving it, I notice its metal legs are ice cold, defying ambient temperature even in summer's peak, and etched into the aluminum, visible only if you look with intent, are microscopic patterns, perfect concentric circles, interrupted by sharp, angular symbols, identical to those that bloomed and faded on my windshield. I've considered analysis, experts, labs, but the tripod always returns to the darkness of the closet. Some enigmas resist dissection, yet I keep it. A cold metallic reminder that what I witnessed was undeniably real, that for a handful of impossible minutes in a frost-rimed clearing, I brushed against something utterly beyond. And somewhere, in the deep woods, under the cloak of night, those lights continue their dance, perhaps waiting for the next soul foolish enough to follow their ethereal glow into the unknown. My twilight jogs were once a sanctuary, the rhythm of my feet on asphalt, a dependable metronome against the day's static. I never imagined this ritual, this unwinding, could girdle into a source of quiet dread. Post-work, my customary path loops the neighborhood's edge, skirting the husk of an old textile mill. Long defunct, it broods in silence. A skeletal fence of corroded chain link sags around its perimeter, punctuated by oxidized placards, weeping rust stains down concrete posts. Shattered panes gape like missing teeth in its brick facade, swallowing the meager light. Utterly lifeless, always dark. The street lamps along this particular stretch offer only anemic glows or are sightless voids altogether, rendering the night opaque beyond a few paces. Yet, this quietude was its allure. Fewer souls, scant traffic, an uninterrupted space to purge the mental clutter of the day. That shadowed passage, once the cherished heart of my run, soured several weeks ago. One evening, something felt discordant. A novel awareness, cold and unwelcome, whispered that the solitude was illusory. I pounded the pavement, attuned to the cadence of my own breath, striving for that steady rhythm. My footfalls slapped back from the worn concrete. Usually this echo, woven with the sighing wind, composed the night's only soundtrack. But that particular dusk, a phantom percussion seemed to join mine. The faintest whisper of other steps. Was it merely the acoustics of the street? A trick of the ear? Uncertainty coiled within me, raising the fine hairs on my arms. Initially, I dismissed it. An echo perhaps, or the distant thrum of an unseen vehicle blocks away. Yet, the sensation of being observed intensified, a palpable weight settling between my shoulder blades. My shoulders instinctively hunched, my jaw tightened. A dense pressure bloomed in my gut, heavy as swallowed stone. Impulse seized me. I froze mid-stride, pivoting sharply, my gaze sweeping the desolate street. Emptiness greeted me. A couple of streetlights pulsed erratically. The mill's fence retained its familiar, derelict posture. Rusted links, a cruel fringe of barbed wire crowning it. No flicker of movement disturbed the pooled shadows. My heart hammered, a clumsy drum against my ribs. My breath hitched. After a protracted moment suspended in that stillness, I shook my head, forcing a brittle laugh, and pushed myself back into motion. Nothing further troubled the remainder of my run. By the time I reached home, the incident felt absurd, a self-spun fancy. I showered, ate sparingly, and consciously steered my thoughts away from the mill. A few days elapsed. Same route, same time. As I approached the derelict structure once more, the feeling returned, Not tentative this time, but insistent. My pulse leaped the instant I rounded the corner onto the mill street. Here, the pavement buckled and cracked, the gutters choked with refuse. My own sneakers striking the ground were loud in the stillness. Yet again, I could have sworn another rhythm shadowed mine, ceasing abruptly whenever I faltered. Several times I spun around. Each time the street lay vacant, silent under the weak lamps. A constriction tightened my throat. A chill, unrelated to the mild night air, traced a path down my spine. My palms grew slick. I wiped them unconsciously on my shorts and quickened my pace, suddenly desperate to leave that particular block behind. The following day, the factory haunted my waking thoughts, its image superimposed on spreadsheets and emails. Was I merely feeding my own anxieties, or did some genuine anomaly linger there? That evening, compelled, I ran again. Same route. I resolved to master my runaway imagination. But the unease descended the moment my feet hit that stretch of pavement. The mill loomed to my right. Tall, grime-streaked windows, mostly shattered or crudely boarded, cryptic graffiti scarring its lower walls, no hint of interior light. I moved swiftly along the sidewalk, eyes darting, scanning the periphery. The oppressive feeling bore down. My legs felt unnaturally heavy, my breathing shallow and quick. I caught myself glancing back repeatedly. Still, nothing, nobody. After several more nights steeped in this low-grade paranoia, frustration eclipsed fear. I resolved to get a closer look to dispel the phantoms. Ratching the fence, I clambered onto a squat concrete block nearby, seeking a vantage point over the rusted barrier into the yard. I anticipated the usual tableau of industrial decay. Splintered pallets, perhaps the hulking shapes of abandoned machinery. Instead, a brief, sharp glint of light flared from within the main building, a momentary burst as if from a torch or a small battery-powered lamp. The sight sent a jolt through my chest. There was no earthly reason for light within that sealed-off edifice, especially at this hour. It was derelict, condemned. My pulse throbbed in my temples. "Hey!" The shout escaped me, pure reflex, no plan, just a surge of adrenaline demanding acknowledgement. Instantly, the light vanished. Silence rushed back in, thick and absolute. No answering sound, no scuff of retreating feet, no groan of a rusted hinge. My skin prickled. My heart galloped. I realized my knuckles were white, gripping the top wire of the fence. A minute stretched into an eternity. Finally, I dropped back to the sidewalk, standing there, adrift in indecision. Eventually, I retreated, resuming my run. But my mind was a frantic whirl. If someone was inside, they'd hurt me. Their silence felt deliberate, unnerving. The next day, I sought out Mr. Henderson, a security guard stationed near a small office complex a block away. He often patrolled the exterior in the evenings. Casually, I inquired if he'd ever noticed any activity around the old textile mill. He regarded me with mild puzzlement. That place, he asserted, had been shuttered for years. No power, no personnel, nothing. He recounted how the owner had initial trouble with trespassers, but that was easily a decade past. Now, supposedly, the building was left undisturbed, secured with boards and heavy locks. He shrugged, conceding that perhaps transients occasionally found a way in, though he personally hadn't witnessed anything suspicious. Quiet as a tomb, far as I know, he concluded. I offered my thanks and departed, a fresh wave of unease washing over me. The factory hadn't felt quiet at all. That evening, I paused at the head of the block, studying the structure from a distance. It was nearing 9, the air cooler now. Broken windows on the upper floors caught slivers of moonlight, reflecting them like vacant stares. I waited, watching intently for several minutes. Stillness reigned. No lights flickered within its depths. My stomach remained knotted with tension, a powerful reluctance to run that gauntlet warred with the stubborn need to confront the feeling. I forced myself forward. The run began uneventfully. My shoes crunched over debris. A lean stray cat darted across the road. The building hulked beside me, immense and silent. Then the presence manifested. Potent, immediate. A certainty settled upon me, eyes boring into my back. I stopped abruptly, turned. Nothing but the dimly lit, empty street. My exhale shuddered. A strange tingling spread through my arms, my body bracing for fight or flight. I stood transfixed, scrutinizing every shadow, every recess. Then, pushing onward, faster than before. The mill's oppressive nearness clung to me long after I'd passed. A few nights later, the unresolved mystery gnawed too fiercely. I decided on a more thorough reconnaissance, not to breach the building itself, but to examine the perimeter again, perhaps find a revealing vantage point. This time, I came prepared. A compact flashlight, darker attire, a conscious effort to muffle my steps. Around 10, I reached the fence. The site was submerged in darkness, devoid of visible watchers. I searched along the rusted barrier for any weakness, a potential ingress. Near a corner, I discovered it. A section where the chain link near the ground appeared crudely cut or pried open. Crouching low, I slipped through the gap, acutely aware of my vulnerability, heart pounding against my ribs. The yard was a graveyard of industry. Decaying crates, tangled knots of rusted rebar, defiant weeds thrusting through cracked asphalt. The air hung thick with the smell of dust and damp earth. A breeze stirred, rustling unseen plastic sheeting stacked against a wall, producing a faint, papery rattle. I moved with deliberate slowness, sweeping the flashlight beam across the ground, searching for fresh footprints or tire tracks. None were apparent. My mouth was parched. Swallowing offered no relief to the constriction in my throat. I edged closer to the main structure. The primary doors were sealed with heavy planks. A smaller side door, near what seemed a former loading bay, was secured with a formidable chain and padlock. Impenetrable. I found a narrow gap between the boards covering a ground floor window and peered through. Absolute blackness met my gaze. A stale odor drifted out. Old wood, decay, perhaps mold. "Hello?" I whispered, the sound startlingly loud in the void. "Anyone here?" Why I expected a response I couldn't say. My voice echoed faintly, then died. Nothing answered. My heart hammered as I crept along the building's flank, seeking another entrance or a lower broken window. Near the far corner, I found one. A small shattered pane, just large enough to offer a limited view. I angled my flashlight beam inside. It illuminated a cavernous room cluttered with dust-shrouded shelves and spectral shapes of old machinery, draped in ghostly white sheets. My hand trembled slightly. Vivid images flashed through my mind. A figure, suddenly stepping into the narrow cone of light. Holding my breath, I listened intently. At first, only the frantic pulse in my own ears filled the silence. Then subtly, a faint scraping noise emerged from deeper within the factory's bowels. It was soft, irregular, the sound of something heavy being dragged laboriously across a rough surface. I couldn't pinpoint its origin, but the sound resonated through me, tightening every muscle. The hairs on my arms lifted. A cold sweat beaded on my forehead. I remained frozen, flashlight beam darting through the gap, probing the shadows, but revealing only the same static tableau of dust and neglect. A visceral wave of fear washed over me. I pictured unseen eyes tracking my light, someone lurking just beyond its reach, waiting. The thought of calling the police flickered, but I hesitated. What concrete proof did I have beyond unsettling noises and a vague sense of presence? Explaining my trespassing would be awkward at best. My pulse raced, a frantic rhythm against the oppressive silence. Forcing myself to move, I stepped back from the window, scanning the yard one last time. Still nothing. No movement, no lights. Yet the factory felt undeniably occupied, pregnant with a hidden, watchful presence. Escape became imperative. My limbs felt shaky, my mind churning through worst-case scenarios. I crouched, slipped back through the rent in the fence, heart still hammering. Staying close to the shadows, I moved quickly away from the property, glancing repeatedly over my shoulder until I reached the relative safety of the main street. I jogged the entire way home, feeling exposed and vulnerable. For the following week, I rerouted my runs, choosing brighter, busier streets through the town center. But each night, back in the perceived safety of my apartment, my thoughts inevitably drifted back to the mill. Was the light on? Was someone still inside, engaged in God knows what? Curiosity, that persistent itch, eventually overwhelmed my caution. I returned to my original route, timing it slightly earlier, around 8 in the evening. Perhaps the lingering daylight would dispel the shadows, both literal and imagined. The street was deserted as ever, but not yet fully claimed by night. I ran slowly, deliberately, my eyes fixed on the building. No lights shone from within, no movement disturbed the yard. The familiar tension, however, remained coiled tight in my chest. I was midway down the block when a sharp clang shattered the quiet. Metal striking concrete, originating from behind the factory fence. I stopped dead, adrenaline surging. Every instinct screamed retreat, but an inexplicable compulsion drew me back to the fence line. Peering through the links, I scanned the yard, now bathed in the deepening twilight. Near the side door, the one I'd found chained, I saw it. A distinct silhouette, humanoid, crouched low. My heart leapt into my throat. I opened my mouth to call out. But before any sound emerged, the figure straightened and slipped swiftly through that very side door. It hadn't been secured after all. Then, the yard was empty. Still. Rooted to the spot, I struggled to reconcile what I'd just witnessed. A person, undeniably, not an animal, not a trick of the light. My stomach churned. Sweat trickled down the back of my neck. After a long moment, I backed away slowly, careful not to draw attention, abandoning any thought of confrontation. I resumed running, my legs heavy as lead, casting frantic glances behind me until the looming structure finally receded from view. That was my final approach. My investigation, such as it was, concluded there. Since then, I've adhered strictly to safer paths. Yet, the urge sometimes surfaces. A perverse pull to pass by, to see if the enigma offers another glimpse of itself. The memory persists. The ephemeral light, the dragging sound, the fleeting silhouette. Something resides in that derelict space. Something clandestine that prefers the dark. It isn't my responsibility to unearth it, I tell myself. I haven't alerted the authorities. A sliver of guilt remains for leaving it unresolved, but it's overshadowed by the visceral dread that clamps down whenever I even contemplate nearing that place again. So now I navigate different streets on my runs. They are louder, brighter, populated, offering fewer recesses for lurking anxieties. Though a residual edginess sometimes prickles my awareness. A fleeting sense of being watched, it lacks the suffocating intensity of the lonely stretch beside the old textile mill. I cannot unsee what I saw, cannot unhear what I heard, even lacking definitive answers. Should anyone else feel drawn to explore its secrets, I hope they possess stronger nerves. That place is either locked down for reasons unseen or merely host to someone with their own compelling motives for secrecy. Regardless, I am finished with it. My evening runs are meant for clarity, and clarity cannot coexist with the gnawing fear of what might stir within that abandoned building. Sometimes, driving past, in the full glare of day, I see the factory. It appears almost benign under the sun. Just a decaying brick shell with broken eyes and boarded up mouths, but I know it's nocturnal transformation. I know there's more concealed within its walls than daylight reveals. For now, that knowledge must suffice. I possess no proof of malice, nothing concrete or quantifiable, only the unwavering conviction of my gut, screaming repeatedly that something there is profoundly wrong. That conviction is why I will not go back. The clock's numerals burned 2 a.m. into the darkness when the cadence began again. Heavy steps, the unmistakable impact of solid soles on unforgiving pavement, echoing from below. This was no phantom conjured by sleep. My eyes snapped open, a frantic drummer taking up residence beneath my ribs. The bedside clock glowed its thin, accusing light. Always this hour. My loft, a cavern hushed save for the faint urban luminescence filtering through the single tall window, felt suddenly too large, too empty. Outside, in the alley, the pacing resumed, back and forth, a steady, unhurried rhythm that scraped against reason. That alley you see is a dead end, a bricked-up cul-de-sac. Nowhere to pace to. Yet the steps persisted, trapped in some unseen endless circuit. From my vantage point, the alley remained a void, yet the sound possessed an undeniable clarity, sharp and present. It pinned me to the mattress, breath caught shallow in my throat, ears straining, parsing every scrape and footfall. In that electric stillness, certainty crystallized. This was not born of my imagination. This Spartan loft, chosen for its proximity to the office, had been my home for a scant month. It was little more than a whitewashed box, one large room holding the bare bones of necessity. A diminutive sofa, a table partnered with a solitary chair, a bed that promised rest it rarely delivered, and the essential kitchenware. The appeal had been simplicity, a short walk cutting through the urban tangle. By day, the neighborhood pulsed with life. Shops disgorging customers, the scent of coffee drifting from the corner cafe, the pharmacy, a bright beacon. But nightfall drew a shroud over it, silencing the bustle, leaving the streets feeling hollowed out. Perfect, I thought. Quiet. No clamor of traffic, just a straight path to my desk. Behind the building lurks the alley, a narrow throat between structures, ultimately choked off by a blind wall of weathered brick. A single, sputtering street lamp casts an inadequate pool of light, leaving most of its length steeped in shadow. I'd noted its existence on my initial viewing. The agent had waved a hand dismissively. Just a dead end, he'd offered, nothing more. It remained unremarkable until my first weekend settling in. Sleep was just beginning to beckon when the resolute footsteps intruded. Late-night reveler, I'd assumed, weaving their way home. But the clock showed 2 a.m., a Saturday, and the sound didn't fade. It merely reversed direction, back and forth, insistent. Curiosity pulling me from bed, I peered through the window pane. Nothing. No silhouette, no fleeting shadow. I scanned the gloom, convinced my eyes were failing me because the sound, that solid rhythmic tread, was irrefutably there. Morning found me draped in unease. Descending to the lobby, I sought out one of the building's sentinels, inquiring hesitantly about strange nocturnal sounds. He offered a slow, deliberate nod. Yeah, he conceded, his voice low. Hear it sometimes. A pause. Gone down to look, more than once. Never a soul. Odd thing? He shrugged, a gesture of weary acceptance. Told the super, but what's to be done if there's nobody making it? His lack of alarm was somehow more chilling than outright fear. Another watchman, overhearing, added his piece. Always the same time, isn't it? Around 2. Heard it myself. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I craved a mundane explanation. A neighbor's peculiar habit, faulty plumbing. But the shared bafflement solidified my own disquiet. That night became a vigil. I extinguished the lights, positioning myself by the window. A sentinel in my own small fortress, waiting. Below lay only a sliver of the alley, a stage dimly lit. The air in the loft grew thick, amplifying the sound of my own respiration. My phone screen became an object of obsessive focus, seconds crawling toward the appointed hour. Precisely at 2:02 a.m., the performance began. Sharp, almost metronomic footfalls traveling the alley's length, pivoting, returning. My gaze tracked the invisible trajectory, trying desperately to map sound onto the empty space. Nothing. Sweat beaded on my palms. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. A primal urge to flee warred with an equally potent paralysis. This couldn't be real, yet the evidence pounded relentlessly against my eardrums. Decision struck, confront the source, or its absence. I pulled on sweats and shoes, snatched my phone, and hurried towards the elevator, chest tight with a suffocating anxiety. Would opening the alley door finally reveal the nocturnal walker? Downstairs, the older night watchman presided over the hushed lobby. "You hearing that?" I whispered, breathless. He nodded, his expression etched with unease. "Right now," he confirmed. "But listen, kid, you go out there. Nothing. You won't find a thing." Still, the need to see, to know, propelled me forward. He unlocked the side door. a heavy click echoing in the silence. I stepped into the narrow passage. The air hit cool and damp, carrying the smell of wet concrete. And instantly, silence. The footsteps ceased the moment I crossed the threshold. The watchman followed, his flashlight beam slicing through the gloom. Trash bins huddled against one wall. The impassive brick face loomed at the alley's terminus. We paced its length, peered behind the bins, scanned for hidden recesses or escape routes. Solid brick, solid ground. A true dead end. No gates, no concealed doors. I turned to him, bewildered. Inside the walls, maybe? He shook his head, the movement slow, final. Worked here too long. No secret passages in this old place. Let's head back in. A profound discomfort settled over me thereafter, rendering my own space alien. I clung to routine. The early rise, shower, coffee, the walk to the office. Work provided a necessary distraction, its demands pushing the nocturnal enigma to the periphery. But as evening bled into night, the familiar tension would coil in my chest, a grim anticipation of the 2 a.m. haunting. I experimented with headphones, flooding my ears with music, with podcasts. Yet somehow, through the noise-canceling foam, the phantom cadence still registered at its appointed hour. Sometimes I'd pull them off, just to confirm. Yes, there it was. Steady, relentless, pacing its invisible track until roughly 2:30 a.m., then dissolving into the night as if it had never been. One restless night, I texted my friend, Leo, detailing the unsettling phenomenon. His response was laced with joking disbelief. Record it, he'd suggested. And so I did. Propping my phone near the window at 1:50 a.m., I let the voice recorder run its course until the half-hour mark. Listening back later, the footsteps were undeniably present. Crisp, clear, heavy. Leo heard it too, admitting it sounded exactly like someone walking on concrete, but quickly rationalized it away. Pipes, echoes, atmospheric tricks. He laughed when I invited him to witness it firsthand. A nervous edge to his amusement, politely declining. His skepticism felt like another brick in the wall. Daylight hours found me scrutinizing the building's exterior, searching for architectural quirks, potential sources of acoustic illusion. A taller structure pressed close on one side, the alley squeezed between them, terminating at that immutable brick wall. No windows faced the alley directly from the adjacent building, just a sheer, blank expanse. Only the upper floors of my own building possessed windows overlooking the space. The neighboring wall felt monolithic. I walked its length, rapping my knuckles against the brick, listening for hollowness. Nothing. Conversations with neighbors yielded little. Most slept soundly or dismissed any faint sounds they might have heard. A few admitted hearing something occasionally, but hadn't dwelled on it. Frustration mounted. Was I the sole custodian of this auditory ghost? Weeks bled into weeks, marked by a new nightly ritual. Before the critical hour, I'd extinguish every light, standing vigil by the window, eyes fixed on the shadowed cleft below. My pulse would quicken around 1:55 a.m., a Pavlovian response to the impending sound. Then, punctual as ever, the first step would fall around 2, and I would see precisely nothing. No form, no flicker of movement, just the stagnant glow from the distant street lamp on damp concrete. Yet the sound remained utterly convincing, chillingly real. tremors would start in my hands. Gooseflesh prickled my arms, the hairs on my neck rising in primal alarm. My mouth turned to dust. Rational explanations frayed and dissolved against the stark reality of the unseen walker. The sound was too defined, too directional, to be mere building groans or echoing detritus. It traced a distinct path, halted, turned, retraced. One night, a bolder impulse seized me. Intercept it. Be in the alley before. 2. I descended, the elevator humming its descent into the unknown. The night watchman raised a questioning eyebrow. Just checking something, I mumbled, sidestepping explanation. He unlocked the side door again. At 1:55 a.m., I stepped into the alley's heavy embrace. My heart hammered against my ribs. The familiar scent of damp stone filled the air. The brick wall at the far end stood like a silent sentinel. Shadows pooled thickly beyond the weak lamplight. I pressed my back against the cold brick of my building, phone clutched tight, ready to capture video, audio, anything. The seconds dripped by. 1:58, 1:59, 2 I held my breath, listening with an intensity that bordered on pain. Silence, profound, unbroken silence, save for distant hum of traffic on the main thoroughfare. 5 more minutes passed in that charged stillness. Nothing. No steps. Feeling utterly foolish, I retreated indoors. As the elevator ascended, carrying me back to my loft, the moment my apartment door clicked shut behind me, the footsteps erupted outside. Loud. Clear. I nearly dropped my phone. Scrambling to the window, I peered down. There they were. Steady, unwavering, back and forth. My hands shook as I gripped the sill. A cold sweat breaking across my skin. How could they recommence the very instant I returned? Another conversation with the watchman yielded only his customary shrug. Been going on a long time, far as I know. Some hear it, some figure it's just echoes. Explanations remained elusive. A call to building management proved fruitless. Without formal complaints, they saw no cause for investigation. Their indifference chafed. But what proof did I possess beyond a strange audio file and my own frayed nerves? My nights acquired a permanent tension. Bedtime became synonymous with dread, my stomach knotting as the witching hour approached. Sometimes I'd force myself to stay awake past 2:30 a.m., enduring the phantom patrol rather than being violently wrenched from sleep by it. I'd lie in the dark, listening, tracking the invisible path, watching the minutes crawl on my phone screen until the sound finally ebbed. Usually around 2:30, give or take. Only then could sleep, fractured and uneasy, begin to claim me. I tried my neighbor across the hall, Marcus. He worked from home, seemed grounded. He admitted hearing the steps once, dismissing them as originating from the adjacent building. When I pointed out the alley's dead-end nature, his brow furrowed with discomfort. Look, I don't know, man. He shifted, gaze sliding away. Maybe some vagrant slips in. I reiterated the lack of hiding places. He clearly wanted the conversation over, looking at me as if I were deliberately courting unease. Defeated but not quite broken, I attempted one last gambit. Video evidence. Phone propped on the windowsill, lens aimed squarely at the alley stage. I hit record at 1:50 a.m. Then I retreated to my table, waiting in absolute stillness, listening to the frantic thrumming in my own chest. At 2:02 a.m., The familiar cadence struck up. I stared intently at the phone, silently urging it to capture something, anything. A whispered plea escaped my lips. "Show me." By 2:25 a.m., the alley fell silent once more. I reviewed the footage. The microphone had captured the footsteps with perfect fidelity, loud and distinct. The video, however, showed only an empty, dimly lit alley. No movement, no shadows playing tricks, nothing. A profound weariness settled in. Moving felt drastic, an admission of defeat spurred by phantom footfalls. Yet my sleep, my sanity, felt perpetually under siege. Each night, the approach of 2 a.m. brought a wave of visceral dread. Earplugs, music, white noise machines, all proved useless barricades against the invasive sound. It sliced through everything, sometimes, pressing my hand hard against my ears. I felt I could still perceive it, a low thrumming vibration deep in my bones. One night, resolve hardened within me. I couldn't just lie there, passive. At 2:10 a.m., knowing the steps were in full swing, I pulled on a jacket and raced downstairs, pulse hammering a wild tattoo. The sound seemed amplified in the hallway, almost deafening as I waited for the elevator. The night watchman was waiting, his expression unchanging. I strode past him without a word, pushed through the side door, and stood at the alley's mouth. Silence descended instantly, utter quiet. I waved toward the alley's depths, signaling my intent. He offered a slight, resigned shake of his head, but didn't intervene. Slowly, cautiously, I ventured into the darkness, my phone's flashlight beam trembling on the damp ground. Droplets glistened in small puddles. No footprints disturbed the wet concrete. No trace of recent passage despite the heavy tread I'd heard mere moments before. It felt utterly vacant. I stood there for a long minute, breathing raggedly, then turned and looked up towards my own window. A faint rectangle of light in the towering brick face. Of course, I saw no one looking down, but my mind churned. How could sound exist so vividly without a source? Returning to the lobby, the watchman met my gaze with that familiar, weary shrug. No words were necessary. The footsteps never ceased their nightly patrol in the weeks that followed. Every single night, 2 a.m., until roughly 2:30 a.m., the same unwavering pattern. Even when Leo crashed on my couch for a weekend, the sound persisted, though he, a notoriously heavy sleeper, remained oblivious. He believed the recording, acknowledged its strangeness, but lacking the visceral experience, it remained an abstraction. He departed, offering sympathetic but ultimately empty platitudes, leaving me alone once more with the nightly disturbance. Now it is simply a feature of this place, an inexplicable constant. I cannot unravel it. The watchmen offer no theories. Management remains indifferent. My neighbors choose not to notice. The footsteps arrive at 2 a.m. They pace for their allotted half hour. They sound like boots on stone. They are made by nothing visible. Descend to confront them, and they vanish, only to resume the moment you are safely back inside. A routine impervious to intervention. I've tried leaving at odd hours, hoping to disrupt the cycle, but the phantom march remains inviolate. I am still here. Each night, the familiar surge of anxiety tightens its grip as the clock nears the hour. I've abandoned the quest for answers, whether it's an impossible trickster, a bizarre acoustic anomaly, or something altogether stranger. I no longer know, or perhaps care to discover. I know only this. The sound is real enough to record, real enough to steal my sleep, and real enough that no one can offer a concrete explanation. It has woven itself into the fabric of my nights. I stare towards the darkened window, listen to the steady tread, and wait. After 30 minutes, they fade, releasing me into a fragile quiet. Then I sleep, and in the morning, I rise and walk to work. That is the shape of it. No matter what I do, the footsteps remain, and every time they begin, my heart still pounds. My eyes still flick towards the window, searching the empty alley for a form that never appears. There is nothing. Only the sound, night after relentless night. I live with it. The woods beckoned that Tuesday, promising solace, a quiet untangling of thoughts only solitude could offer. A fool's errand, perhaps. The regret began its insidious crawl almost the moment my boots, belonging to Elara now, touched the trailhead. This path, worn smooth by my own past journeys, felt suddenly estranged, veiled beneath a bruised sky. The familiar pines loomed darker, swallowing the light, and the air hung thick with a silence that felt expectant. Initially, the rhythm was comforting, the crisp percussion of my boots on fallen leaves, the sporadic commentary of unseen birds high in the canopy. But the deeper I traversed, the more the woodland seemed to hold its breath. First subtly, then profoundly, the ambient chorus dwindled. No breeze whispered through the branches. No chatter broke the stillness. A profound, almost vacuum-sealed quiet descended, muffling the world. I dismissed it, a trick of the profound hush. Yet, an undeniable prickling started at the nape of my neck. The ancient instinct of prey. Eyes unseen, surely, were tracking my progress. The sensation intensified, a palpable weight pressing against my back. My gaze flickered constantly towards the dense undergrowth, scanning the shadowed boles of ancient trees. Nothing. Only the passive indifference of the forest and the lonely ribbon of trail spooling out behind me. Paranoia, I insisted. Just nerves frayed by the oppressive quiet, but then a faint counterpoint to my own tread. Crunch. Soft, deliberate, mirroring my rhythm from somewhere beyond the veil of trees. I froze mid-stride, breath caught in my throat, ears straining against the sudden, absolute silence. Gone. The phantom echo vanished, leaving only the frantic thrumming in my own chest, loud in the stillness. A ridiculous tremor, I told myself, forcing my legs back into motion. A deer, a trick of acoustics in the dense woods. Yet, the conviction settled deep in my bones. I was not alone. Something shadowed my passage, a presence that breathed when I breathed, halted when I halted. The feeling clung like damp moss, chilling despite the absurdity. This wasn't childhood fear of the dark. This was primal, visceral. Enough. I lengthened my stride, pushing forward, determined to outpace this unsettling phantom. My boots hammered a quicker tempo on the packed earth, and then, undeniably, thud crunch, louder now, closer, keeping perfect time with my hurried escape. A cold dread seized me. I spun around, heart slamming against my ribs, eyes raking the trees, the path behind. empty. Utterly, maddeningly empty. Immobilized, caught between the unseen threat behind and the unknown trail ahead. Retreat? The thought of willingly walking towards that unseen pursuer sent ice through my veins. No, forward. Forward was the only direction that didn't feel like surrender. I pivoted back, resuming my trek, hoping desperately for another hiker, a break in the trees, anything. But the pursuit grew bolder. The steps behind were no longer mirroring, but gaining. Louder, heavier, imbued with a terrifying insistence. Panic flared, hot and sharp. My walk bled into a desperate jog. Then an all-out ragged run. Air seared my lungs, branches whipped at my face. I refused to look back, couldn't bear to confirm the proximity I felt. An oppressive nearness. A chilling weight descending. Then, abrupt silence. The relentless echo behind me vanished mid-stride. I staggered to a stop, gasping, chest heaving. Slowly, dreadfully, I turned. Still nothing. Just the impassive trees, the silent path. And then my eyes snagged on it, a pale square against the dark bark of an oak, just off the trail. A piece of paper, pinned crudely with a twig. Trembling fingers plucked it free. Aged parchment, frantic script. 3 words burned into my vision. You're not alone. A glacial cold seeped into my marrow. Not random, deliberate. Someone knew this path, knew my presence, watched me find this. The silence of the forest suddenly felt charged, teeming with unseen observation. Standing there, clutching that horrifying little message, was unbearable, trapped. The only escape was back through the territory, stalked by my pursuer. With a surge of adrenaline, I spun on my heel and started back towards the trailhead. My pace was frantic now, a near run, eyes flicking ceaselessly into the dense, darkening woods. Every shadow seemed to writhe, every fallen log a crouching form, and then, softly at first, but undeniably there, the sound returned, tap, crunch measured steady, dogging my retreat. No looking back, not this time. To look felt like inviting it closer, acknowledging its presence. I pushed harder, legs pumping, breath tearing from my throat. Louder the steps grew, closer, impossibly close now, almost treading on my heels. Sheer terror propelled me. Blindly, I ran, the path a blur beneath my pounding feet. Then, salvation. The tree line broke, revealing the small gravel clearing, my car, a mundane sanctuary. I flung myself towards it, wrenched open the door, slammed it shut, the click of the locks echoing like gunshots. Keys shaking violently in the ignition, engine roaring to life, gravel spitting as I fled. Distance devoured the menacing woods. Relief washed over me, potent and dizzying, yet thin, fragile. The immediate terror receded, but the imprint remained. The weight of unseen eyes, the chilling cadence of those pursuing steps. Sometimes in the quiet moments, a phantom echo resurfaces. Tap, tap, crunch. A disquieting whisper from the edge of memory insisting that on that overgrown trail, I was never truly by myself. The security feed flickered, and within the grainy monochrome of the sculpture hall, an indistinct darkness bled across the screen. Scarcely more than a smudge, a fleeting anomaly. Yet it sent a jolt through my chest, a sudden tightening. I blinked hard, eyes stinging, willing the image into clarity. But the shape, whatever phantom it had been, dissolved back into the empty corridor's static geometry. Barely an hour into my vigil, and already the silence felt charged, prickling along my nerves. A deep breath, a muttered dismissal. A glitch surely, and the familiar weight of the heavy-duty flashlight settled into my hand. Still, the unease lingered, a cold knot in my gut I couldn't ignore. Guardian of slumbering history, that's the job. Elias, night watchman. 6 months patrolling the hallowed quiet of this museum. Its arteries branch into wings of canvas chronicles, earthen shards of forgotten ages, brittle whispers of ancient manuscripts, and the vast echoing chamber devoted to sculpted forms. Each night unfolds the same ritual, traversing the corridors, scrutinizing the cyclopean eyes of the cameras, ensuring the locks bite tight. Usually, the only companions are the low thrum of climate control and the sharp report of my own boots on the polished stone. But tranquility began to fray about a month past. It commenced as whispers of motion, disembodied footfalls. There, amidst the marble populace of the sculpture wing, my flashlight beam would carve arcs through the gloom, kissing the surfaces of impassive giants. I'd tread softly, verifying secured doors, the silent readiness of alarm sensors, then the faintest echo, steps mirroring my own, yet not mine. Less sound than suggestion, delicate taps skittering off the high walls, their origin elusive. A swift turn, flashlight slicing the air. Nothing. Just the vacant spaces between stone figures. I'd pause, breath held captive in my lungs, listening to the profound stillness. Then, onward. Initially, I blamed the hall's acoustics, my own tread bouncing back in the cavernous space. But the phantom cadence grew bolder. One night, it danced around me. I stood near a corner plinth, inspecting the base of a brooding philosopher for any disturbance, when the soft scuff of a shoe sounded to my right. I pivoted, light beam spearing the rows of sculpted stillness. Empty. Silence pressed in. Then the steps manifested to my left. A swivel of my head, only to hear another pair fall directly behind me. A tremor started in my hands, the cone of light wavering on the impassive walls. Each time I thought I'd pinpointed the source, the sound ceased, a taunting game of auditory hide and seek. My throat constricted, a weight settled on my sternum. I forced myself to remain rooted for a long minute before retreating, resolving to consult the monitors. Back in the control room, the screens displayed only sterile emptiness. The corridors lay dormant, utterly devoid of movement. A flush of foolishness washed over me, yet the certainty remained. Something was fundamentally amiss. My pulse still drummed a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I recalled wiping a film of perspiration from my brow. The air conditioning's chill failing to penetrate the sudden, inexplicable heat that gripped me. Architectural settling. Phantom drafts from vents. I offered myself these mundane explanations, but a deeper instinct recoiled. Those footsteps had possessed a chilling distinctness. Another time, unfamiliar prints materialized upon the floor. Immaculate surfaces, buffed to a mirror, shined each morning by a meticulous cleaning crew, were marred. Near the Roman bust exhibit, during my rounds, I found them. Dusty impressions leading from the main archway toward the room's heart. Smaller than my own heavy boots, yet definitively adult, their size ambiguous. Crouching, I traced their path with my light, seeking a destination. They simply ceased abruptly, a few yards in, as if their maker had been plucked skyward or simply dissolved into the air. I scanned the vicinity, probing shadows beneath display cases, behind pedestals. No lurking figure, only the familiar prickle on my nape, the sensation of unseen eyes observing. A glance over my shoulder met the vacant stares of the ancient Roman heads. Always unnerving in the nocturnal gloom, tonight one seemed altered. Its marble face, angled slightly, seemed directed towards me. I froze, centering the flashlight beam upon it. The sculpted expression remained unchanged, lips parted in their rigid, classical pose. Yet the conviction lingered. It had moved, a primal urge to flee, warred with duty, security, calm. I stepped closer, examining the bust, wondering if it had always faced this way. A tentative touch confirmed its solidity. No looseness, no recent repositioning noted by maintenance. The base was undisturbed. The label offered no clues. My arms felt unsteady, my breathing shallow. Imagination, I insisted, pushing onward to the next gallery. The tremor in my limbs betraying my forced composure. The following evening brought a faint, grating sound from the vicinity of the Greek statues. Life-size titans on imposing pedestals, capturing mythological dramas in cold stone. Hearing the noise, I navigated the aisle, my light sweeping the floor. Near the base of one pedestal, something glinted, minuscule flakes of stone. Kneeling, I rubbed them between my fingertips. Gritty, real. My gaze traveled upward to the statue itself. A hero poised mid-action, arms raised as if preparing to hurl an unseen spear. I scrutinized its form, searching for fresh scars, chips, any sign of damage. Nothing obvious. The statue appeared intact, yet, again, that subtle dissonance. The angle of its head seemed fractionally different, tilted almost imperceptibly. I retreated a step, my grip tightening on the flashlight, heart thudding a heavy cadence against my ribs. Later, cocooned in the relative safety of the security room, I replayed the camera feeds. Nothing accounted for the scraping. I rubbed tired eyes, zoomed in on the Greek gallery. Absolute stillness. Rising, I paced the small space, swallowed lukewarm coffee, listening intently for any sound beyond the door. A distant thud reverberated through the building. I flinched, startled. The coffee mug clattered against the desk as I set it down, my hand shaking too violently. Flashlight retrieved, I eased into the corridor. The sound had emanated from the sculpture wing. My own footsteps felt deafening on the polished expanse as I crept forward. Peering around the corner, the low ambient light rendered the statues into looming silhouettes. There stood the hero, sentinel on my left. It looked unchanged, yet the uncanny feeling returned, a sense of being watched by those stone eyes. I drew a slow breath through my nose, straining to hear over my own heartbeat. And then it came. A soft exhalation, disturbingly close, directly behind me. I spun, flashlight beam trembling violently. Nothing. The corridor stretched empty behind me. Goose flesh erupted across my skin. A profound chill settled deep in my bones. The breath had been sharp, brief. A curse escaped my lips as I dragged a hand across my face. Get a grip, Elias. I swept the light across every surface, floor to ceiling. Only more statues, frozen in the periphery. I moved towards the next section, methodically checking doors. Each handle turned, met resistance, confirmed locked, solid, secure. I scanned the floor for prints. Clean tiles reflected the dim overheads. Anyone here? My voice, thin and strained, bounced back unanswered. The remainder of that night bled away in the security room, each tick of the clock an eternity. My stomach churned, my gaze kept snapping to the monitors, anticipating a spectral figure gliding across the screen. None ever materialized. My anxiety vibrated through me, my legs restless beneath the desk. In the ensuing days, I sought refuge in routine, arriving early to walk the halls bathed in the unambiguous light of day. Everything appeared benign then. The statues resumed their inanimate nature. They carved expressions less menacing under the sun's oblique rays. Curators and staff bustled, their presence grounding. But as dusk bled into night, the museum transformed. The silence thickened, acquiring a palpable weight, and every incidental creak or hum sent shivers down my spine. One evening, the familiar 10 o'clock ritual began. The grand entrance, the medieval armor display, the hushed gallery of paintings, all checked, all quiet. Then, drawing a fortifying breath, I turned towards the sculpture wing. A wide hallway, flanked by glass cases holding smaller antiquities, served as its antechamber. Approaching the threshold, I heard it. A faint tap, like knuckles rapping gently on plaster, from within the wing. I paused, pressing my ear against the cool air of the open doorway. Silence. Stepping inside, my flashlight beam cut a swath from left to right. Statues lined the hall like silent sentinels, some roped off, others close enough to brush against. I advanced towards the center, pausing intermittently, my rubber soles squeaking embarrassingly loud. I tried to muffle my steps. Suddenly, an icy draft kissed the back of my neck. A distinct chill, localized, impossible. No vents were nearby. I whipped around, flashlight held defensively at chest level, braced to confront a face. Again, emptiness. But the cold patch lingered on my skin, raising goosebumps. Methodically, I forced myself to inspect each statue, base, label, posture, scrutinizing for deviations, comparing against the memories seared into my mind from previous nights. Most stood immutable. Then I reached a central figure, draped in flowing robes, one arm outstretched. Something felt wrong. That extended arm. It seemed higher, angled more acutely towards the ceiling than I recalled. Kneeling, I rested the flashlight on the floor, its beam illuminating the limb from below. I stared, dredging up the memory of its usual pose. My chest tightened. It was different. Subtle, undeniably, but altered. Leaning closer, my fingers brushed the cold stone. An electric jolt shot up my arm. I snatched my hand back as if burned. Simultaneously, my belt radio erupted in a burst of harsh static. I nearly cried out, fumbling for the device. "Elias here, go ahead," I managed, my voice shaky. Only more crackling, then dead air. Clipping it back, I pushed myself upright, struggling to regulate my breathing. My palms were damp. A frantic visual sweep revealed no tools, no signs of forced entry, nothing to suggest vandalism. I backed out of the sculpture wing, resuming my patrol, testing doors down the adjacent corridor. Locked, locked, locked. It was then I resolved to formalize my observations. An old forgotten logbook surfaced from a drawer in the security office. Each night, post rounds, I began chronicling the anomalies. Footprints noted, statue positions sketched, strange noises recorded, feelings of being watched documented, times meticulously logged for cross-referencing with camera footage. A new, heavy breathing felt close behind near Greek hero statue. Turned, no one present. Noticed small, fresh-looking chips near pedestal base. Another entry. 3 distinct sets of footprints observed near Roman busts. Vanished mid-floor. I attempted to broach the subject with Finn, one of the day guards. Casually, I asked if he'd ever noticed anything odd in the sculpture hall after hours. He just shrugged, offered a dismissive chuckle about old buildings being inherently spooky. No specifics, no shared experiences. I didn't press him, a sense of embarrassment silencing me. Was I losing my grip? Yet, I continued filling the notebook, each entry solidifying the conviction that these weren't tricks of light or mind. One night, deep into the graveyard shift, around 3 a.m., I was cycling through the camera feeds. Routine surveillance. Then, the North Corridor monitor caught my eye. A flicker at the screen's edge. I leaned closer, squinting, adjusting the contrast. My heart gave a sickening lurch. It was the statue's head. It turned, a slow, deliberate rotation, almost a nod. In the next instant, the feed dissolved into digital snow, the screen going black. Cursing under my breath, I wrapped the monitor's casing, waiting impatiently. When the picture returned, the statue was inert, facing forward, precisely as it should be. I rewound the recording, searching for the moment. The glitch occurred at the exact same time, stamp obscuring the movement. A wave of icy dread washed through me. I struck the keyboard with my fist, frustration and fear warring within me. Abandoning the console, I grabbed my flashlight and headed directly to that corridor. The statues stood in their silent ranks, offering no hint of recent animation. The air was cold, a low hum emanating from the track lighting overhead. I approached the specific statue, an ancient dignitary clad in formal robes. Circling it slowly, I examined every inch: base, pedestal, identification tag. Nothing amiss. A pressure built in my chest. The feeling of breath held too long. Exhaling raggedly, I forced a semblance of calm. Then I leaned in, close to the impassive stone face. Its blank eyes stared into the distance beyond me. But I perceived it. A subtle tilt to the head. An angle I swore hadn't been there moments before on the screen. Or even minutes ago in reality. My pulse surged anew. Fumbling for my phone, I tried to capture it, evidence to compare against archival photos. The phone's camera stubbornly refused to focus. The image swam, blurred, the lens hunting futilely. 3 attempts yielded 3 distorted, useless pictures. I wiped the lens clean, tried again. Same result. Shoving the phone back into my pocket, I turned away sharply. Every nerve ending felt frayed, electrified. A heavy pulse throbbed in my neck. I retreated to the security room, feeling utterly drained and profoundly disturbed. The last few nights have been variations on this theme. The phantom footsteps pacing just behind me. The inexplicable cold breath on my skin. The footprints that materialize from nowhere and vanish into nothing. Pedestals subtly shifted, mere inches, but shifted nonetheless. Dust and stone fragments appearing inexplicably at the feet of statues. No concrete proof, no intruder caught on camera. Just this mounting weight of inexplicable occurrences. I sense it, an unseen presence shadowing my rounds, always just beyond the periphery. My hands grow clammy, my throat dry, the muscles across my shoulders perpetually knotted. Rational explanations flicker and die. Drafts, settling foundations, mischievous colleagues. None fully account for the pattern, the consistency, the feeling. The statues. I can't shake the conviction they stir when darkness cloaks the museum. Tonight, as I scroll these words in the logbook, the sound has returned. Faint steps echoing from the adjoining gallery. My heart hammers against my ribs. The flashlight rests on the desk beside me, its familiar weight momentarily ignored. I'm trying to gather myself before investigating. My hands tremble. Part of me wants to barricade the door, ride out the remaining hours pretending ignorance. But the job demands otherwise. Fear cannot paralyze duty. I will take the light. I will walk back into that hall. I will see if the stone figures have rearranged themselves once more. Uncertainty churns in my gut. My palms slick with sweat. But I must go. If the breathing returns, I'll spin faster this time. If prints appear, I will follow them to their impossible end. I need to know if this is sabotage, or if something truly ancient and uncanny walks these halls with me. I'm standing now. The chair scrapes back. My own breath sounds too loud, too fast. My forehead is damp. Pulling open the door, I step into the corridor. An overhead light buzzes, flickers momentarily. Faulty wiring, I tell myself, forcing one foot in front of the other. A quick glance at the security app on my phone. No signal. Useless here. My nerves feel like live wires. The footsteps seem louder now, closer, reverberating towards me. A hard swallow. I raise the flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom. Ahead, did a shadow just slip behind a pedestal? Real? Imagined? My heart slams against my sternum like a trapped bird. There's no retreat now. Dawn is hours away. I have to keep moving forward. This is my watch, and I can no longer afford to look away. That granite markers might waltz in the moonlight was a notion I'd always relegated to the realm of spectral whimsy, the kind of tale spun to frighten children. Laughter, or at least a dismissive smirk, had been my usual response. Until a certain dawn, when the familiar geometry of remembrance seemed subtly, inexplicably altered. I'd swung open the cemetery's wrought iron gates, just as the sun bled pink across the horizon. A ritual ingrained over years of service. Yet surveying the grounds, a dissonance registered. Certain headstones felt estranged from their remembered positions, disrupting the silent congregation I knew so well. My initial reflex was denial, a hasty assumption of faulty memory. Imagination, I chided myself. But the unease lingered, and the following evening, staying well past dusk, I observed with deliberate focus. It was no trick of the mind. Permit me to lay the groundwork. Silas is the name etched on my employment papers, and for nearly 10 years, the tending of this quiet necropolis, its grass, its paths, its occasional vacancies, has been my solitary charge. The cemetery itself is modest, nestled against the periphery of a town where stillness reigns. Visitors are infrequent, mostly descendants tending to ancestral plots overgrown with time. My duties encompass the mundane upkeep, mowing, clearing walkways, ensuring a veneer of respectability. And yes, the digging of new graves, though thankfully, that task is rare. Most evenings culminate in the familiar routine: securing the main gate, inspecting the perimeter fence, a final, contemplative circuit through the sleeping grounds. Roughly 3 weeks passed, the equilibrium shifted. It began one morning as I ventured towards the western boundary to corral fallen leaves. This section houses the most ancient memorials, their stone faces weathered smooth, inscriptions eroded into near illegibility. My gaze swept across them, a habitual check for order. Instantly, a visceral wrongness prickled beneath my skin. The spacing felt adjusted, as if unseen hands had nudged certain markers mere inches apart. Nothing overt, you understand. But my familiarity with this particular stretch is intimate, forged through daily proximity. I know the precise interval between each stone and the tree line's shadow. I dismissed it then, memory playing its tricks, and bent to my task, gathering leaves into brittle piles, determinedly ignoring the knot tightening in my gut. That night, completing my final walkthrough, I tarried among the oldest graves. My flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, illuminating each stone in turn. I recall the sharp caress of the breeze, the sibilant whisper of wind through unseen branches. I stood motionless for a long while, bathing the row in artificial light. All appeared normal. Locking the gate, I walked home, convinced I was merely overwrought. Yet, the next morning revealed fresh abrasions in the soft earth beside a pair of those very stones. The telltale signature of something heavy dragged across yielding ground. Crouching, I examined the disturbed soil. It resembled the aftermath of shifting a hefty bench or substantial rock, yet devoid of accompanying footprints. No litter, no evidence of youthful trespass, only those peculiar scars upon the dirt. This marked the beginning of my fixation. Each dawn brought a meticulous survey, a mental mapping of every tombstone's locus. Each dusk, after the gates were chained, another circuit, another comparison. Before departing, a final scrutiny. A small notebook became my confidant, filled with crude diagrams of the rows, notations on marker shapes, and their relative placements. Within a week, denial crumbled. No fewer than 4, perhaps 5, stones were demonstrably migrating. Not dramatic leaps, but subtle repositionings. A few inches leftward one night, a slight tilt or forward slide the next. Patterns began to coalesce in this seemingly random dance. By the second week, the phenomenon had spread, more headstones joining the silent ballet, forming an uncanny cluster near the western edge. I resolved to witness it firsthand, an overnight vigil. Armed with a thermos of strong coffee, a folding stool, and my trusty flashlight, I secreted myself within an antiquated storage shed near the back fence. Its single grimy window offered a clear vantage of the elder graves, provided I remained unseen. Darkness enveloped the shed. I doused my light. Hours crept by. A cramp seized my leg. The night's chill seeped through my jacket. The world shrank to the sound of my own breathing, the occasional rustle of unseen nocturnal life, the distant lament of a dog. Around the second hour past midnight, I slipped out, moving with a predator's stealth towards the suspect rows. My heart hammered against my ribs. A film of cold sweat beaded on my brow despite the frigid air. I stared, willing movement from the silent sentinels. Nothing. Patience, I urged myself, crouching low behind a substantial granite monument, its cold bulk a tangible anchor in the unnerving stillness. Moonlight rendered the stones as stark silhouettes against the lesser dark. An hour, perhaps longer, I held that strained posture, thighs burning. Then, silence itself seemed to hold its breath. A headstone, squat and weathered at the row's furthest reach, slid. Not a tremor, not a gradual lean, but a distinct lateral jump of several inches. Utterly soundless. My own gasp felt like a betrayal of the profound quiet. I felt my pulse surge, a primal urge to flee, warring with a desperate need to observe. Another stone, 10 feet distant, tilted fractionally, then glided an inch or two forward. My hand clenched the rough granite I hid behind, its texture biting into my palm. Before the strange activity ceased, perhaps 4 or 5 markers had assumed new positions within their silent tableau. Disbelief warred with the undeniable evidence before me. Shaking, I struggled to commit the new configuration to memory. When I finally rose, legs numb and unresponsive, I flicked on my flashlight. Slowly, deliberately, I walked among the shifted stones. Their altered geography was irrefutable, starkly different from mere hours before. The following morning, my notebook became a repository of change. I charted the new positions against my previous sketches. The movements weren't random. They described nascent patterns, almost geometric in their precision, converging, hinting towards the cemetery's far corner, dominated by an old, imposing granite mausoleum. I walked towards it, heart thudding. Its heavy iron gate remained securely locked. Circling the structure, I scrutinized the ground. Initially, nothing seemed amiss. But at the rear, hidden from the main paths, lay a patch of earth subtly different in color and texture. Looser, fresher than the surrounding compacted soil. Subsequent nights confirmed my suspicions. The stones continued their clandestine rearrangements, their movements growing more purposeful, sketching a partial pathway. Some leaned distinctly, like silent fingers pointing towards the mausoleum. Others formed a subtle arc, seemingly delineating the boundary round that patch of disturbed earth. A conclusion began to form. Something lay buried there, something the stones themselves were indicating. One quiet afternoon, ensuring solitude, I locked the gates from within, retrieved a shovel, and approached the spot behind the mausoleum. Tension coiled in my muscles as the blade bit into the soil. Each scrape resonated unnaturally loud in the stillness. My pulse quickened with every inch of progress. What secrets lay beneath? Downwards, I dug, perhaps 2 feet, encountering earth both stubbornly packed and oddly yielding. An hour dissolved into focused labor before the shovel struck something solid. A large rock, I first assumed, but clearing the dirt revealed wood. Ancient, damp, dark, not coffin fragments. There were no skeletal remains, no funereal trappings. It suggested a container, rectangular, bound with rusted iron bands. The wood was fragile, flaking under my touch. I sat back on my heels, breath catching, heart pounding a frantic rhythm. What lay within? Carefully, I excavated around the object. Roughly 3 feet in length, a foot across. Mud caked my gloves. Heaving, straining my back, I wrestled it from the earth and onto the grass, brushing away clinging soil. Faint symbols, etched long ago, were barely discernible on the decaying surface. Searching for a latch, I noted one iron band seemed looser. Using the shovel's tip as a lever, I applied pressure. Near the band, the rotten wood groaned, then splintered. The lid protested with a dry creak. My hands trembled. A chill, unrelated to the air temperature, traced its way down my spine. I lifted the lid. Inside rested a rolled cylinder of aged parchment and a small cloth-wrapped metal object. Unwrapping it revealed a crude medallion, heavily tarnished, bearing an indistinct design. I carefully unrolled the parchment. It displayed a series of cryptic markings, lines, shapes, vaguely resembling a map. It seemed to depict the local topography, perhaps the town's layout, though rendered in unfamiliar symbols, lacking any recognizable text. A small drawing depicted what looked like a hillock, surmounted by another strange glyph. An ancient clue, perhaps, pointing elsewhere. Dirt smeared my hands, sweat cooled on my skin despite the temperate air. Crouched there, amidst the quiet dead, a sudden rustling from the main path sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through me. I froze. Discovery felt imminent, disastrous. How could I possibly explain this desecration? My mind raced. Slamming the lid shut, I pocketed the parchment and medallion, shoved the box out of sight, and frantically refilled the hole, tamping the earth down, attempting to erase my intrusion. I tucked the box behind the mausoleum's blind wall, then hastened to the front, leaning the incriminating shovel against the stone. A maintenance truck rumbled past on the road outside, but the gates remained undisturbed. My hands shook, not just from exertion, but from the dawning realization. The tombstones had guided me. In the ensuing days, snatched moments were dedicated to the parchment. The medallion, cleaned gently, revealed its secret beneath layers of grime. An etched symbol, a circle nested within a triangle. Holding the cool metal felt strangely significant. The nightly migrations continued, the stones arranging themselves into more complex figures, arcs, partial circles, their silent choreography growing bolder. Sometimes, a faint grinding sound seemed to accompany the shifts, brief and instantly swallowed by the quiet. My chest tightened with each witnessed movement. I considered confiding in a colleague, a man who occasionally assisted with groundswork. His bewildered stare and hesitant query about my well-being were answer enough. Some truths, it seemed, were too outlandish to share. The parchment and medallion remained hidden, locked away. Comparing the cryptic map to an old survey of the town, procured from the library archives, revealed correlations. Certain lines mirrored the land's contours surrounding the cemetery. The map's epicenter aligned perfectly with the graveyard itself. Another, smaller mark corresponded plausibly to a nearby hill. Was there another cache? The thought stirred a profound unease, a mixture of compulsion and dread at the prospect of solitary digging on some lonely slope. Meanwhile, the stones persisted. Their latest configuration resembled a distinct arrow pointing beyond the cemetery walls, urging me onward. Did I truly wish to follow? Yet, an obsessive curiosity had taken root, demanding resolution. One evening, armed with a flashlight, I trekked the short distance to the hill indicated on the old map. I found the clearing, shaped just as the parchment depicted. The ground here felt firm, undisturbed. No signs, old or new. I paced the small space, beam cutting through the darkness, shoulders rigid, heart pounding. The wind sighed through the trees, amplifying the oppressive solitude. Nothing. Returning to the cemetery that night, questions swirling, I found the stones rearranged once more, now aligning with the main walkway. The familiar drag marks scarred the dirt. I followed the path, flashlight beam dancing across the granite faces. My neck ached with tension. I stopped before a large headstone, one that had shifted a good 6 inches since morning. My hand traced its cold, rough surface, and then I saw it. Near the base, almost obscured by time and lichen, was an inscription I'd never noticed. Not a name, not a date, but a symbol. The small circle within a triangle, identical to the one on the medallion and the parchment map. A thrill, sharp and electric, shot through me. Sweat sprang to my palms. I held my breath, rubbed my eyes, looked again. It was undeniably real. The connection snapped into place, the map, the medallion, the moving stones, this symbol. They were communicating, orchestrated by some unseen intelligence, guiding me. I scanned the silent, watchful darkness. The cemetery held its breath, but my own heart roared in my ears. So I remain, Silas, tender of graves, keeper of a secret that breathes beneath the soil. The diurnal rhythm persists. Trim the hedges, sweep the paths, but nightfall brings the vigil. Acceptance, a strange bedfellow to disbelief, has settled in. The stones migrate. This is now a fundamental truth of my world. I cannot fathom the how or the why, but I witness it. I feel its pull. Each subtle shift nudges me closer to unlocking a mystery buried for generations. The box behind the mausoleum, the cryptic parchment, the tarnished medallion, the recurring symbol, fragments of a narrative far larger than myself, a narrative I am now inextricably part of. My tools, torch, spade, the cryptic parchment, reside in the boot of my car, a trinity of readiness for the next directive. Every glance towards the elder stones raises the hairs on my neck, quickens my pulse. I scan the earth for fresh traces, question my sanity, yet trust the evidence of my senses. Tombstones ought to remain fixed, anchors against the tide of time. These do not, and their strange pilgrimage is far from over. They are leading me towards something concealed within this consecrated ground for centuries untold. I have reconciled myself to the likelihood that this secret will not remain interred much longer. Now I merely await the final piece of the puzzle sliding silently into place. Tomorrow morning, the rows will be checked anew. Each displacement recorded, the evolving pattern analyzed. How far this path extends, I cannot guess. I know only this. The stones have not finished their silent discourse, and I intend to listen until I comprehend precisely what they strain to reveal. This mountain refuge, this timbered shell perched among the peaks, was meant to be an anchorite's dream, an escape velocity achieved. Ilias craved the ritual simplicity, dawn heralded by crystalline air, days steeped in silence. The inaugural night offered precisely that balm, a profound quietude settling over him. But the second rotation of the earth brought a shift, a subtle dissonance, the unnerving prickle of unseen eyes fixed upon him. No substance, no shadow cast, just an instinctual tremor vibrating through the solitude. Soon, this intuition solidified, coalescing into something tangible. A stark silhouette against the gloaming, standing sentinel at the forest's edge as twilight bled across the snow. Now, the nights are taut wires of apprehension, and the days offer scant reprieve. He sought isolation as a cure. Instead, it festers, a self-inflicted wound. Weeks have melted away since his arrival. He recalls the heave of duffel bags onto the rough-hewn floorboards, the rhythmic thud of split logs stacked beside the hearth, the meticulous sweep of his gaze into every shadowed recess. The cabin is a modest affair, one primary chamber incorporating a rudimentary kitchen, flanked by a sleeping alcove and a cramped washroom. Dominating the living space, an old cast-iron stove radiates vital warmth against the encroaching chill. Its fire a flickering heart he tends diligently. Tall, narrow windows punctuate the walls, framing vistas of snowdrifts and spire-like pines. A slender porch wraps two sides, a fragile boundary against the immensity. Beyond lies only white expanse and the dark columns of ancient trees. The access road, a mere ribbon snaking down the mountainside, becomes impassable under winter's siege. A feature, not a flaw, promising absolute seclusion from the clamor of civilization. No neighbors, no traffic's drone, just Elias and the vast, indifferent wilderness. The initial days were a blur of settling, hauling firewood until muscles screamed, folding clothes into drawers, coaxing the small generator behind the cabin to life, establishing his laptop on the scarred kitchen table. His aspirations were humble, to write perhaps, or simply to exist within his own thoughts, letting the mental clutter disperse like mist. Daylight hours passed in tranquil observation. The soughing wind orchestrating the pines, the soft percussion of snow shedding from laden branches. Evenings descended into a deeper hush, yet peace held firm. He'd secure the door, draw the thin curtains, ignite a few candles, casting flickering amber light. That first night breathed serenity. Then came the second dusk. Elias stood near a window, tending coffee, simmering on the stovetop. The aroma, a small comfort. His gaze drifted outward. Something registered at the periphery of the clearing, near where the forest thickened into impenetrable shadow. Was it merely the gnarled architecture of a tree trunk, or something else? As his vision sharpened, a flicker, suspected movement, slow and deliberate as a creeping shadow. It stilled abruptly, a cold wave washed through his gut. His heart gave an unsteady lurch. Nothing, he chided himself. A trick of the fading light, fatigue painting phantoms. He turned from the window, poured his coffee, and willed the unease away. Later, cocooned in manufactured darkness, all interior lights extinguished, he risked a glance through a slit in the curtains. The night sky sprawled, obsidian velvet pricked with starlight. The moon, a mere sliver, offered little illumination. He strained his eyes, scanning the snow-dusted landscape, empty. Then, as his pupils dilated further, a faint disturbance resolved itself near a towering pine, an upright shape, undeniably humanoid in its outline, yet devoid of discernible features. He watched, breath held captive, and swore he saw it glide several paces closer. His respiration grew shallow, the familiar icy tendril tracing his spine. He remained rooted, a statue staring into the void, fighting the urge to blink. He blinked. The figure seemed to shift again, an almost imperceptible advance. He recoiled from the window, mind frantic. A part of him screamed to burst outside, challenge the intruder, brandish a flashlight. Instead, paralysis held him fast, trapped in a dizzying debate. Reality or hallucination? Eventually, the need for certainty overpowered the fear. Fetching his flashlight from a kitchen drawer, he unbolted the front door and stepped into the biting cold. His breath plumed white in the torch's beam. Snow groaned beneath his boots. He swept the light across the tree line, probing the darkness. Nothing. The presence had vanished. He circled the cabin, the beam slicing through the night, illuminating only snow-laden branches and silent trunks. No tracks marred the pristine surface. No sign anyone had been there. Retreating inside, he double-bolted the door. Sleep that night was a shallow, haunted thing. Morning light brought a measure of foolishness. Fatigue, shadows, an overactive imagination, plausible culprits. He ventured out to gather more firewood, and then he saw them. Dark impressions stamped into the snow, forming a precise circle around the cabin, maintaining a consistent distance of perhaps 20 or 30 feet from the walls. He approached cautiously. Not animal spoor. These resembled boot prints, disconcertingly larger than his own. He followed the perimeter, confirming the unsettling geometry. A perfect loop enclosing his sanctuary. The snow within the prints was slightly compacted, suggesting careful, deliberate passage. His stomach clenched anew. He scanned the silent surrounding wilderness. Empty. Only the whisper of a light wind through the pines broke the stillness. He captured a few images with his phone, though the flat light rendered them ambiguous. His photographic skills inadequate to the task. That day became an exercise in forced normalcy, punctuated by jolts of anxiety. He cleaned, organized the pantry, checked the generator again, tested the emergency radio. Periodically, he stepped outside, scrutinizing the tree line under the revealing glare of daylight. Nothing untoward, no lurking shapes, no unnatural stillness. But as the sun commenced its slow descent, painting the western peaks in fiery hues, the familiar dread began its insidious crawl back into his veins. He built the fire high, secured the locks, drew the curtains tight. He attempted to lose himself in writing, but his focus fractured. His gaze repeatedly snagged by the curtained windows. Evening deepened into true night, and with it came the sound. Faint, yet unmistakable. The crunch of boots on snow. Slow, measured, deliberate steps approaching. Elias froze, listening intently. His breath hitched, his knuckles whitened where they gripped the table edge. The footsteps persisted for several agonizing seconds, then ceased. He rose, moving towards the window, easing the curtain aside, just enough for a narrow view. The darkness was profound, but there it was again. The shape, occupying nearly the same position as the previous night. Definitely the outline of a person, perhaps slightly stooped, or maybe just an effect of the angle. His pulse hammered against his eardrums. He reached instinctively for the flashlight, but before his fingers closed around it, the figure took a distinct step forward. His heart slammed against his ribs. No face, no clothing, just this dark, absorbing form against the snow. He yanked the curtains shut, hands trembling despite his resolve to be brave. Throwing the door open, he flooded the spot with the flashlight's beam. Emptiness greeted him. The space was vacant. The trees stood impassive, skeletal branches swaying gently. Shaking now more from adrenaline than cold, he advanced a few yards from the porch, his voice thinner than intended as he called out, "Hello? Who's there?" Only silence answered. He completed another circuit of the cabin. Nothing. No fresh prints disturbed the snow, no flicker of movement in the periphery. Just his own ragged breath and the crunch of his boots. After minutes that stretched into an eternity, he retreated inside, secured the locks, and fought down rising panic. He spent that night clutching the flashlight, sleep arriving only in fitful, shallow bursts. Every creak of the old cabin's timbers, every sigh of the wind jolted him awake, convinced he heard something just outside the walls. Dawn found him exhausted but alert. His first act was to peer outside. More footprints, the same circle, reinforced, freshly indented in the snow. He examined them closely. The same unnerving distance from the cabin. Questions swirled, sharp and unanswerable. Who? Why? How did they disappear without a trace? A tightness constricted his chest. The impulse to pack, to flee, warred with the stubborn refusal to be driven out, compounded by the recent snowfall and the dubious state of the mountain road. Yet the thought of escape hammered insistently. He managed to reach a local ranger station via the crackling radio. He reported a trespasser, someone circling his cabin nocturnally. Had he seen the person clearly? No, he admitted. They promised to send someone when possible, perhaps the next day, citing short staffing. He tried to temper the desperation in his voice, aiming for concerned rather than panicked. "I'm worried someone's messing with me," he stated plainly. They logged his details and assured him they'd follow up. The daylight hours were consumed by vigorous chores. Chopping firewood behind the cabin demanded more effort than anticipated, the cold air searing his lungs, his muscles protesting. Physical exertion offered a welcome distraction, yet the habit of glancing over his shoulder, scanning the trees, persisted. Time crawled. Mid-afternoon found him standing by the circle of footprints again, studying the rhythm of the stride. Consistent, measured. He tried to deduce the height of the walker, the type of boot, but the impressions remained frustratingly vague in the crystalline snow, revealing no distinct tread pattern, only their unsettling size relative to his own. Late afternoon bled into dusk, and the tension coiled tighter within him. The fading light felt ominous, each lengthening shadow a potential hiding place. He forced down a meager meal of canned stew heated on the stove, his eyes constantly darting towards the windows as the sky outside transitioned from bruised orange to deep violet. His stomach twisted. He lit an oil lantern, its warm glow a feeble defense, and checked the flashlight batteries once more. Darkness fully claimed the mountains, and the sound returned. Crunch, a single step pause, crunch. Elias set down his bowl, his senses straining. His heartbeat a heavy tattoo against his ribs, His hand shook. Rising, he gripped the flashlight and moved with deliberate quiet towards the front door, his boots whispering on the floorboards. He twisted the lock, paused, listening. The crunching continued, slow, rhythmic, then stopped. He wrenched the door open, sweeping the flashlight beam across the snow. The powerful light cut a swathe through the night, illuminating the near trees, the empty porch. Nothing. He stepped onto the porch, breath catching in his throat. The hairs on his nape prickled. "I know you're out here," he yelled, the sound thin and ragged in the vast silence. No reply, no movement. He slammed the door shut, heart pounding, and threw the bolt. This time, he resolved to watch, extinguishing all lights save the low burning lantern behind him. He positioned himself near the window, parting the curtain just enough to maintain surveillance. The forest was a wall of impenetrable black. Minutes passed as his eyes adapted. Then he saw it. Closer now, perhaps within 30 yards of the cabin walls, it stood utterly still, facing him. His mouth turned to dust. His pulse throbbed in his temples. He stared, locked in a silent, terrifying confrontation. It felt like an eternity compressed into moments. His palms grew slick with sweat. He considered reaching for his phone to document this, but the fear of breaking eye contact, of missing a crucial movement, held him captive. As if sensing his thought, the figure seemed to fold downwards, crouching or melting into the snow. He blinked, a reflexive spasm, and it was gone. He surged from his chair, stumbling, adrenaline flooding his system. He flung the door open again, flashlight beam stabbing into the night. Futile. Nothing. No fresh prints, no disturbance. Only the profound cold and the silent trees. He paced the confines of the small cabin for what felt like an hour, a caged animal desperate to quell the frantic energy coursing through him. Why? How? The questions echoed, unanswered. He finally settled into the chair by the stove, straining to decipher every nocturnal sound. Phantom scrapings near the walls. Wind, or something else. His body remained coiled, every muscle taut, ready to spring. The flashlight lay heavy in his lap. The fire poker, within easy reach. He remained vigilant until the first pale fingers of dawn crept over the eastern ridges. He rose, stiff and bleary-eyed, and went outside. The footprints were there, a perfect circle, renewed in the night. He searched again for any deviation, any track leading away into the trees. Nothing, as if the walker had simply materialized and dematerialized on the spot. A surge of helpless fury mixed with bone-deep fear washed over him. He kicked viciously at the snow, obliterating a section of the prints before realizing the potential folly of destroying evidence. Frustration clawed at him, his breathing ragged, heart hammering. He just wanted it to end. Elias hasn't fled. Not yet. He remains a prisoner in his chosen sanctuary, awaiting the ranger's arrival. A storm gathers in the forecast, threatening to render the road truly impassable, adding another layer to his entrapment. Doubt whispers, perhaps it is just paranoia, a drifter playing cruel games, an explanation waiting just beyond his fear-fogged perception. But each night, the shape manifests. Each morning, the footprints reappear, that perfect, chilling circle. Now seated at the table, He watches the sun bleed away behind the peaks, steeling himself for the inevitable descent into darkness. His gaze flicks constantly to the windows, anticipating the silent watcher. His shoulders ache with tension, his hands unable to find rest. If the footsteps begin again tonight, his reaction remains uncertain. One impulse urges him to charge into the night, confront the source of his terror. Another pleads for retreat, to curl into the smallest corner and cease to exist. His stomach is a Gordian knot of dread. There is no peace here, no inspiration, only this corrosive fear, steadily mounting. He commits this account to paper, to the ether, lacking any other recourse. Perhaps it will find believing ears. Perhaps someone holds a key to this nocturnal ritual. All Elias knows with certainty is that he is not alone in this wilderness. Something or someone waits for the gloaming, and when the light fails, it emerges, step by inexorable step, drawing its inscrutable circle closer. By dawn, it vanishes, leaving only those immaculate tracks in the snow. Too precise, too controlled. He cannot fathom it. He only knows the solitude he sought has become a shared, terrifying vigil.